one of the things that I always think about is I think about ways that you can diverge from, let's say, if I have one station and I say 5 tables, this is a reach goal. It is not what I expect tomorrow from you, but it is so that if I walk up to you guys and you two are a table of two, you three are a table of three, and you guys are right next to each other and you can hear me having conversations. I'm walking up to you and saying something to you, and you don't feel like I'm using the same words next to you. So the example of that could be somebody comes in and they say, like, what is this restaurant? Like, what are you guys doing here? And you could say in one arm, we're a Portuguese inspired seafood restaurant, right? Very simple. The other route that I could say is we're a restaurant. Our focus is primarily on seafood, and we are in love with Portugal. And so a lot of the dishes that we have on the menu have a basis from Portuguese recipes, right? Two different ways to say something that's the same in the end. So what I want to do is I want to practice you guys introducing what the restaurant is, because you know that you're going to be asked that, and you know that there's going to be a time where you're going to have to say what we are. And I wanted to start feeling comfortable for you. What I will say is I come from a school where years ago, when I would be at a space like Jean Georges, we would do a full menu transition in one day. And what that would mean is that our formal dining room would have 36 dishes, our informal dining room would have 24 dishes, and we would have to, in one day, be able to spit those out to the guests who came into it as if we knew what we were talking about. So often, what you would find us doing is anyone standing in a corner with another person practicing how to call things out, right? So we talked. Did I talk with this group? I didn't talk about it with this group. Amazing. So, second thing that I want to talk about is how you describe a dish and how you call something out to a table so it becomes easy. Because when you get menu descriptions, your first thought is going to be, this is overwhelming trying to remember it. Okay? The things that you want to be able to do is put it into a formula in which you could take any dish and then be able to describe it easily, right? And that it doesn't take so much headspace for you to be able to figure out how to talk about it with the guest, okay? Because we are a culinary first company, our focus is going to be less on flowery language. Let's be honest, means nothing, right? Like, I can tell you I've been to restaurants where somebody tells me, I ask a question about a particular dish, and they tell me that the dish is elegant. That means nothing, right? Like, you've given me literally less than zero. Like, I have no clue what that actually means. What we're going to talk about our food is in the vein of understanding it from the perspective of, if you were in the kitchen, you're a sous chef talking to a chef, right? So what I like to break that down into, and this will be a bullet for when you go into your menu description classroom. So just think, you'll have more information on this. This isn't to put you on the spot, and it's not things that you have to just absorb right now, okay? What I like to think of when you think of how to describe a dish, okay? I like to take the main component, could be a protein, it could be a vegetable, right? I like to then describe what has been done to it. I like to then describe what it is served alongside, what finishes the dish, and a garnish that might stand out. That is, and the garnish might not be described, right? But basically what I'm doing, people eat with their eyes. How many times have you gone into a space and you've had a dish described to you by a server and it comes out to your table and it looks different than you expected it to? All of us, probably, right? In the end, we want there to be no surprises, and hopefully we're getting the people that the information that they need to be able to walk into it educated. So what you're going to do is basically give a visual tour. That breakdown could be applied to any of the dishes, right? So for example, I'll give like a classic JG dish and what we used to do. So it was hand-cut ribbons of yellowfin tuna. They're served bound with chili oil, spiced radish, and shallot for a textural component. over avocado puree and finish with the ginger and soy marinade. That is not a dish that's on our menu, but it gives you an idea of how the dish could be broken down, right? So it's not hyper complicated. It's not overwhelming. It's just basically describing it. If I were to look at that dish, you'd find tuna ribbons over avocado with slices of radishes, right? And then a ginger and soy marinade. So really what I'm doing is I'm focusing, and as you go through the menu descriptions and as you go through your food shows of seeing the food, think of how it looks to you and then how you would describe it. The second piece of that is that you're going to describe the things that are the primary takeaways from a flavor perspective, right? So if there's like, let's say that ginger and soy marinade has like a slight amount of orange juice that's located in it. Am I going to bring up the orange juice in it? No, because who cares, right? That's not giving them any information that they want to. Who here has been in a restaurant where you've been told to sell a dish because it's the most popular dish? Raise your hand. Okay. So here's not what our chefs do. They don't plan a menu based on these are the three dishes that are good. All the rest of this sucks. And we just need to fill out the menu, right? Like, so in the end, we only care about pushing these three items forward. What I think that we don't want to be, who here loves somebody who's pushing them in a way that feels very like forceful from a sales perspective? Walk into a retail store, somebody's following you around, asking questions. You walk into a car dealership, somebody's trailing behind you, clearly trying to direct you in a certain thing. It makes you feel uncomfortable, right? Because you don't trust that they're on your side. What we never want to do is fall into the used car salesman stereotypes, right? So, for example, some of you in this room might have had a terrible experience with tequila in high school and you've never drank it again, okay? That's a possibility in America. The reality of that situation is if I know that some of you might not like tequila, why would I offer to all of you a margarita as something that you would immediately, as something that comes to mind when you first sit down? I want to get a little bit of information out of you about what you like and then tailor it to your taste buds or to your palate. So when you think about that, right? Who here likes spicy food? Raise your hand. Who here doesn't like spicy food? Raise your hand. Who here likes creamy sauces? Raise your hand. Who here doesn't like creamy sauces? Raise your hand. Okay, so we have people who are dissenting on almost everything. So if I am just throwing out an option because it's just coming into my head, I'm losing some of the audience. And we talked about before treating people like they're people. We also don't want to be in a situation where you're trapped at a table because somebody hates what you gave them, right? That wastes time, it wastes energy, it's the opposite of them enjoying yourself, and then you have to figure out how to fix it before they leave, all of which is a lot of extra unnecessary work. And so what I would say that we're looking to do is to guide it towards them. So there's a question that guests will ask me inside restaurants, which I can't stress enough is a trap of a question, which is, what is your favorite? Because in the end, they don't know me. They don't care what my favorite is. What they're actually asking is, what is my favorite going to be? Right? That's the question that they want reflected back at them so they know that they're ordering the best thing on the menu. So when somebody tries to pull that game with me, because I will not take it from our guests, remember, you have to be an advocate for yourself in these situations too. I ask questions. So if like, let's imagine that you are in a restaurant like 12 where you have a sommelier who works in the room. Do you think if somebody says that I'd like to order a bottle of wine, that sommelier walks up to the table and immediately says, you know what you want to get? You want to get a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon without asking any questions? No, because you don't even know if they want red wine or even if they like red wine or what price point they want or what they're looking for. They're going to ask questions. So that's the same thing that I would do when somebody asks me that question, what is your favorite? I'm going to say there's a lot of different directions you could go. Do you like the occasional raw dish or do you like your food fully cooked? Do you like heat and spice, or do you like things that are softer and more muted to enjoy, right? I'm going to ask these questions, and what they allow me to do if I've got a menu is they allow me to cross off this one, cross off this one, cross off this one, so that what I'm getting to is actually what they would want, right? It's reflecting back what they might want to actually eat that evening. So it's thinking about things that way where we're tailoring it to them. That is the ideal. I would rather that people came in and had an amazing experience inside the space and maybe didn't get the most expensive items on the menu, as opposed to buying the most expensive items on the menu and disliking all of them because they weren't to their taste buds, right? And then we end up losing them because they never come back because they had a negative experience. Does that make sense? So the idea is that we're tailoring it to them. So when we go through menus, remember that that formula will help you avoid being lost in how do I describe this dish? Main component, what's been done to it, what it's served alongside, what finishes the dish. That outline can get you a long way and can allow you to get out of analysis paralysis when you're stressing about studying a different dish, right? Or you're freaking out about how you might describe it to a table. If you have a way to break everything down, it's not quite so complicated or intimidating, especially when you're learning a high volume of food right off the bat. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? Okay, so now we get to the interactive where I get to pick on you guys. Okay, so raise your hand if I called on you yesterday. Okay, you guys get to sit out. Okay, now I'm going to pick on some new victims. Portuguese inspired seafood restaurant. Okay, I want you to pretend that I asked you what the restaurant was. You've gone through a lot of information about it. I want you to say your piece. After that, I'm going to choose subsequent people, and our goal is to not say the same thing twice. Okay? So I can see that you know that I'm going to call on you first. So first of all, somebody asks you, what type of restaurant are you? What do you say?
He's inspired with an authentic soul.
Okay, perfect. Let's go with the opposite side of the room. You did go very creative there. I could tell that you almost like stumped yourself because you went so high. You did a good job. You did a good job though. Like I did like that. I like the Iberian roots. There you go. That's cool. Nobody likes talking in front of a group, don't worry. Um, where's my favorite glasses? All right, you want to go next? You want to try? Keep on going down the line. A minute, totally. Like some of us need to decompress. So it could be, let's go through some examples. It could be a seafood restaurant. Our primary focus is on, main caught seafood, right? Things that are local to us with an inspiration and flavors from Portugal, right? It could be a seafood restaurant inspired by Portugal. It could be a Portuguese inspired seafood restaurant. Recognize how all those things are kind of saying the same thing, but they're different word choices that are employed, right? So that's what I want you to start trying to figure out. Which way of describing that sounds natural to you, right? Because if it sounds natural to you, it'll sound natural to the guests when you're saying it to them. So there's not one right way to do anything, right? It's just simply figuring out the tone that seems authentic to you and then feeling comfortable saying it a couple of different ways. So you're not a robot that's on autopilot every single time you're called on to answer exactly what the space is. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, let's go back since we have a discomfort with participation today, and I'm not sadistic. We're going to go into a little bit more about food, okay? So I talked before about how you would describe a dish. Let's break down some of the flavor profiles that are important to look for that'll help you to be able to describe how something tastes or figure out what the primary component, because I said before, when you describe it to a guest, think of what the actual flavors that you're getting from it are, because that will allow them to not be surprised when they're tasting the dish. Okay? So one is heat. Okay? Can we give some examples of what might be represented by heat? And I don't mean temperature on a stove. Spices, so that could come in the form of what are different ways that things could be represented in the form of spice?
There's like more sort of savory spices and more sort of sweet spices.
Yeah, I think especially when we're thinking about heat, which is something that like is, can be considered negative if it's too spicy, right? But it can also be something that opens the palate and elevates a dish and gives it just enough pop if it's not in too great of proportions. One of the ways that you can think about it is there's two different things that apply, mouth heat and nasal heat, right? Nasal heat can often be attributed towards roots. So galangal, ginger, wasabi, right? All of those things hit you in the nose first as opposed to the mouth, correct? That makes sense? Then there's a mouth heat. Mouth heat could be represented by chilies, right? Chili peppers, right? Does that make sense to everybody here? How the differences between the two when you're tasting things and how you might feel them and receive them? Both of those, the goal would be that often heat comes in to provide an accent. It makes it more exciting and interesting. In most of the dishes that we will have on this menu, they are not incredibly intense bursts of heat. They're just meant to be there as accents to the plate, okay? So that's something that we'll look for when you're tasting dishes, is what might represent heat in that dish, if it's represented at all, okay? Then the next, we have acids. What is that represented by? Absolutely. Citrus fruits are a great example of acid. What else might be there? Vinegars, right? Absolutely. All of those things, what can acid do? It can create brightness. It can also, let's say you have a lot of fat to a dish. Mentioned before, avocado, right? Which is very on its own, muted, rounded, heavy on the palate, right? When you have that ginger and soy that I talked about before, that's brightening. It cuts through that so it doesn't feel so dense or heavy. So a lot of like classic French sauces will have a vinegar component added into them and folded into them. So whether they're butter-based or not, they feel like there's a balance to it. Does that make sense? Okay. What do we think of when we think of textural components, right?
Crispy.
Could be crispy. Could be what?
Feel
Yeah.
smooth.
So when you're tasting a dish, what you can think of, is there something that's textural that sits with the palate? Could be a garnish, could be a coating, could be a sprinkling of breadcrumbs. There's a lot of things that create variety, that create interest while you're eating, right? We're all like children deep down, right? And we want to be entertained by what we're doing. So oftentimes a textural component can provide that element of interest to a dish, okay? What else is there? Fats, what might be there in the terms of fat? I already talked about one. Butter is one. Avocado could be one, so it could be plant-based or it could be from animal basis. Oils, right? Could be a protein, right? Particular like heavy, dense or fatty protein could have like more of that component. And so you also might look at it the same way where you're cutting something through, or how it plays might have something that brightens it so it doesn't feel quite so dense. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So when you're thinking about food, I want you to start thinking about these things of how you're taking those things away, right? Are you looking for where there might be an element of heat? or there might be an element of acid, or there might be an element of like some sort of fat at play. Those are what create balanced dishes, is all of the different things hitting together and intersecting at the same time. Okay. You know, other things that we can think of things that feel like they have a salt component on the palate. So you could have something that either hits from like soy, or it could actually be salt. Sometimes vinegars can provide that same sort of thing so that there's a little bit of brightness and intensity to a dish. All of these things add to how you interpret them. So when you're tasting, the only thing that I ask is that you guys be analytical with each other and feel free to question each other in it. Nobody's right and nobody's wrong, but it's only as you're tasting these things, as these dishes come to you, that you figure out what you think is important to convey to a guest and what is the thing that you predominantly taste when you're tasting it. Does that make sense to everyone? So it's just starting to think about how you would dissect and how you would look at the flavor components that create a whole on a plate. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Any questions on this?
Your that each cooking method will provide.
Absolutely.
So that's really knowing how it's prepared will give you a flavor profile. If it's grilled, you're gonna get a char, smoky. If it's sauteed or seared in the pan, you're gonna get caramelization, sweetness, other things. So same piece of chicken or same fish, two different flavors
Absolutely.
on how it was prepared.
And that's why we want to think about what that main component is and what's been done to it to get it onto that plate. Does that make sense to everybody who's here?
And so I don't really know a lot about Portuguese food, so it's a whole new thing for me.
Fair.
And just starting to talk about this, about this food, about food in general, at this restaurant makes me really curious about like, are there certain Portuguese salts, for example, like crunchy salts like fleur de sel or Malden salt? Is there something equivalent to that, like from Portugal that I haven't looked up, or is there like a peppercorn blend that they appreciate? And so I don't know, just starting this conversation made me really curious about all those things.
Yeah, and I think to keep in mind that your chefs, this is a conversation, this menu will be a conversation between Portland and Portugal. So you will not be, like we said, it's inspired by Portugal, so you might not be landlocked into every ingredient being Portuguese, but it's good questions to have a basis on, right? And they've done a lot of studying to get to this point. One of the examples of something that I could say that has like a known quality but is different is that one of the dishes that is meant to be shared tableside and meant to be kind of like a playful pop to guests is that cataplana that I had described before that comes in a traditional copper vessel, right? When it's open for guests, it is a seafood stew that has a tomato basis that's quite different. So in different countries throughout the Mediterranean, you might find some things that have similar roots but are different. So a lot of people, like if you go over to, you'll see a lot of seafood stews on menus. You'll see bouillabaisse, which is a French variation of it. This is a very specifically Portuguese version of it, right? And the accompaniments, whether it's rice, etc., are going to be specifically geared towards Portugal as opposed to some of the other spaces that you might find. So you'll find those variations, and I think it's okay to ask questions when you go through the menu planning of how they came up with the dish or where the roots of the dish were, right? If that's not given to you off the basis, you can always ask for that because again, that's storytelling, and that's at a certain point that might come into play in a conversation between you and a guest at a table. Does that make sense? Okay. What other things can you guys think of? Any questions, any thoughts that you have?
I like the idea of storytelling when you present a thing, whether it's a simple idea. What's always helped me is kind of like an exercise of coming up with different connotations, or different, synonyms for different words, but like splash and twist and like just getting creative with language, and it actually does show confidence in the long run. So if it is like just taking a little word bank that we have, and I noticed in the design concept, a lot of the words kind of keep appearing and reading
Yep.
through. So just take those little catchphrases or words you like to use and just kind of add them, subtract them out. But I'm noticing it too, like that's shows a really good design concept when things are fluid and flow together. And you can just take out, you know, one word and add in something that definitely, you know, portrays whatever you are describing. So again, getting away from the script and just getting comfortable and confident.
Very spot on. I think for those of you, my friends who felt more uncomfortable with being called out, it is also okay for you to take the script that we have down on paper and use that at first until you feel more comfortable using your own words for it, right? I just want you to recognize, does this sound like something that I would authentically say if I was saying it to a family member? How can I evolve it so it sounds natural, right? Because when you don't say something that's natural, your tongue gets tied up on it. It becomes difficult to get it out. It doesn't necessarily feel authentic. And that's what we want to avoid. But in the beginning, the reason why you have all this overview of how things go are to have things that are tools for you that you can fall back on in the event that you feel uncomfortable at first expressing yourself uniquely. Does that make sense to everybody who's here? Right? It doesn't need to be that you know, it takes learning to crawl, to learn to walk, to learn to run, right? So nobody expects you to feel 100% comfortable or confident tomorrow on this. It's something to practice that by the time that we get towards opening, you feel comfortable being able to put things into your own words. Does that make sense?
Cultural aspects of Portuguese cuisine beyond like their tin fish industry.
I wouldn't, again, I don't want this to feel like one of the things that I think can be a lot is if you feel like you go to a restaurant, it feels thematic or gimmicky. Um, that to me feels like it's like too much because then it feels like you have to try too hard to think about what everybody's doing around you. It should be something that sits there as a backdrop, but let's say you're someone, you have friends who don't care, right? And just want a good place out to dinner. They should be able to walk into it without feeling like they have to go through a history lesson on Portugal. Whereas the people who might have more experience like you, who have been to Portugal and have traveled there, can feel like, oh, I get why this is the way that it is, right?
Yeah, I can also say that in my brief conversation with Colin and Jim about the food, biggest takeaway is that it's simplicity done really, really well, and that simplicity is actually really hard to do well.
Yeah.
And so not over analyzing it and just looking at it as this beautiful piece of fish, nicely cooked, basic, simple garnish that's well seasoned. And I think that's the biggest takeaway of what the Portuguese food thing is. It's sourcing really high quality stuff, treating it simply, and executing it well, and not overdoing it.
Exactly. That's spot on. So if you think about for us, right, in this room, I can tell you if you traveled, if you talked about people who were traveling or writing stories on travel 20 years ago, right? There would often be a focus on, high-end restaurants. My criticism, why I say, having worked in a 3 Michelin starred restaurant, even though I love the experience for it, sometimes you feel like you go into restaurants like that are so formalized, and they could be anywhere on the planet. It doesn't matter whether you're sitting in New York or Portland or San Francisco or Tokyo or Paris. It's about the restaurant and not about where it's from. Whereas what I think I am more impressed by is, let's say you get on a plane, you go to Rome for the first time. Is the space that you go to going to be a space that you could visit in the United States, or is a space that you go to going to be a neighborhood shop where they've been producing the same sort of pasta for over 100 years. And it feels like that one singular thing is the thing that you go there for that feels very authentic and rooted to where it is. Or you get on a plane to go to Tokyo. And in Tokyo, you go to a 10 counter seat soba noodle shop, or you go to who their focus is on one singular thing, right? Like it's a simplicity of how it's presented. Oftentimes, one of the things that I'll tell you from which I really love that you brought that up. I hate chef tastings. What we used to do in the world is we used to have chefs come in and do these performative tastings where they would go through 4 courses and they'd stand awkwardly in somebody else's kitchen and try all of those things. I was never looking at what they actually put out, but what the potential was, because it's not fair assessment of what they're doing. However, I could always tell the confidence level of a chef because an insecure chef would put more on the plate. There'd be more sauces, there'd be more condiments, there'd be more garnishes, there'd be a lot of things going on. Somebody who was more confident, the dish would look super simple because of the fact that they didn't feel like they needed to camouflage it and they felt comfortable just executing that one thing. So there is a confidence and a challenge in presenting something simply, and simplicity from a culinary perspective is very difficult to execute because there's nothing that can hide any flaws, right? So it just creates this extra layer that is a primary focus for them to make sure that people enjoy the food in the long term. Does that make sense to everybody? What other questions do you have? You sure will. Yeah.
I think describing would be easier once it tastes.
Yeah, you have to taste. I mean, listen,
Obviously,
you could, there's some things that you'll have learned from a theoretical perspective, right? Like some of you might not like a certain fish or protein or whatever it might be. So you have to learn how that would taste to somebody else to be able to describe it, right? Because you don't want to be personally compromised with it. So there's something to be said for learning the theory of how to describe something, even if you haven't tasted it. But really, I think where you connect with things is when you're able to taste them and then understand exactly what its meaning is. So there's portions of learning that will hit both sides of that, right? And I think be connected for you guys. Okay. We're getting close. This is the second day. Second day is really the majority of the day where you're talked at, and you guys are still too new or nervous to feel 100% like your personalities are let loose, which I'm sure will be a different experience next week, no matter what. So there'll be a lot more interactivity as we go into it, and I think you'll feel a lot more comfortable with it. So this is really one of those days where hopefully the information that you're given today is helpful for you, right? And gets you thinking, right? Don't need to come to any immediate conclusions or be, like 100% proficient right off the bat, but at least gets you thinking about some things. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. All right. We are at 11:30. Are they ready for food at this point?
Then they're still preparing food.
Okay.
And it was finished, yeah. Well, what we can do in the meantime, and while we're getting ready for food, is kind of an exercise that I like to do.